After 2 years of dating and nearly 10 years of marital bliss, I was left with a few things. An incredibly expensive house, a mediocre job, a marriage on the rocks, and a group of friends always trying to outdo each other. The only bright spot are 2 wonderful children, David, who's 8, and Megan, who just turned 7. If it weren't for them, I'd have left already. But I can't do that to them. Not yet, at least. Divorce just isn't an option. We bought our house at the peak of the market, sinking deep into debt because we thought if we didn't jump in right away, we'd never be able to afford a home later. Huge mistake. The house is, of course, nice, but we are, as they say, poor owners of an expensive home. If we were to get divorced, neither of us would be able to afford the payments on our own. So I stay mostly for the kids and to avoid living in the backseat of a car. But how much longer will this last? That's the only question I have now. It wasn't always like this. Stress and the pressure of moving in different directions took its toll. Heather had always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding, complete with a house and a white picket fence. Meanwhile, I just wanted to marry the love of my life and travel the world in my free time. But then, children came along and those dreams changed. Heather got pregnant while we were planning a holiday to the south of France. She'd forgotten to take her birth control pills on one of our weekend trips and thought it would be fine since it wasn't her fertile time of the month. She'd always been terrible at math, and with a baby on the way, our dream trip had to be postponed. After David was born, Heather told me that if we wanted another child, we'd need to do it right away. That way, the kids would be close in age, and we could get through diapers and potty training quickly. We didn't expect it to take so long for her to get pregnant the second time around. It was fun at first, actually trying for a baby, but it quickly turned into a mission. With 2 small children in the house, travel was off the table. When we did take trips, we needed a trailer to fit everything we thought we might need. Dreams never truly die. They're simply put aside, waiting for the right time to reappear. I told myself to cheer up as I went through the daily grind. Life wasn't boring with 2 kids. It just wasn't the kind of adventure I used to crave. 8 years later, we were a typical suburban couple. The kids were involved in sports and other activities, and we had a group of friends who were basically just like us, living the American dream. But when the 9th year came, I woke up. My brain started questioning everything it saw. We were barely making the country club dues, and payments on 2 new cars were draining us. Our kids always seemed to need something, and our annual salary raises just couldn't keep up. We were living far beyond our means. Heather worked as a secretary and clerk in a law firm, while I was a middle manager at a plant. Though our jobs weren't prestigious, they covered our comfortable lifestyle, thanks to as much overtime as I could take. As for Heather and me, at least we both loved the kids. My usual outfit was Dockers and a polo, while Heather always dressed to the nines. She said she needed to look professional because she was meeting the firm's clients, but honestly, she was a clerk, not a lawyer standing before the Supreme Court. The worst part was that, after almost 10 years of marriage, the spark had almost completely died. Constant arguments about money and everything else had poured buckets of cold water onto our relationship. We were polite to each other and even shared a bed. But that was it. We were just in it for the kids. At neighborhood meetings, everyone thought we were the perfect couple. I never told anyone the truth, but from the way people looked at us, I figured Heather had probably opened her big mouth about our home life. It didn't matter, though it wouldn't have changed anything. The only good thing that came from these meetings was that Heather usually drank too much and wanted to unwind a bit. I'd stopped calling it love a long time ago. Then, the next day, we'd return to the same old routine. It was disgusting. We'd only had sex twice in the past month, and I was tired of begging. Let me rephrase that. I was tired of begging. My needs weren't being met in any way. Damn it, I'm a man and all men want it. Every hour on the hour. But according to Heather, that wasn't going to happen. At first, she used the kids as an excuse. Then it was that she was tired. Eventually, she just wasn't in the mood. All of this led to even more conflict between us. At the last neighborhood meeting we hosted at our house, Heather was already drunk by the time everyone left. I put away the basics, leaving the rest to be dealt with on Sunday. I was more than ready to relax, but by the time I got upstairs, Heather had already showered and gone to bed. I reluctantly took a shower myself and climbed into bed. I wasn't in the mood. The next morning, as I was preparing breakfast for the kids, Heather came down into the kitchen. Even with the hot pan of bacon and another filled with eggs, the atmosphere was icy. "Sorry about last night," she said. "I didn't mean it. I just drank too much." Something inside me snapped. I raised my voice. "So now you have to be drunk to be intimate with me?" My anger surged. "I don't need your pathetic excuses." The look on her face was priceless. "You might as well keep them, because they're not worth it these days," I added, my thoughts drifting to the last time we'd been close. I took a few steps closer, frustration building. "I'm tired of your arrogant attitude." "Don't worry," she replied coldly. "I won't touch you anymore. This will be a refreshing change. Not having to fight you off every time I pass by." I stormed out, leaving 2 hot pans on the stove. She tried to backpedal that night, but I was still angry and tired of all the excuses. We argued again, and she ran out of the room. I went to bed, but instead of sleeping, I locked the bedroom door and tried to rest. But sleep didn't come. Around 2 a.m., I heard her trying to turn the doorknob, but I wasn't going to let her in. She ended up sleeping somewhere else. Only God knows where. Our house had 3 bedrooms, and they were all occupied, leaving only the sofa in the TV room, which was old and as hard as a rock. At 6 a.m., I got up, showered, dressed, and opened the bedroom door. I woke the kids, got them moving, and headed downstairs. Heather came out of the office, throwing daggers at me with her eyes. "Good morning to you too," I said, walking past her. I made myself a cup of coffee and laid out breakfast for the kids before leaving the house. This was the beginning of a new ice age. We didn't talk after that. We exchanged words but didn't speak to each other. There were no kisses, no hugs, no affection. The tension was thick. When I told her I wasn't going to Carol and Tim's barbecue, she made a scene. "What will I tell them?" she asked. "The truth," I said. "That would be new, wouldn't it? But I guess all the wives already know what a heartless idiot I am." I didn't back down. She and the kids walked across the street with her jelly in hand. She returned drunk as usual. Everyone asked me where I was, and I simply said she wasn't feeling well. That was the end of it. When Heather asked why I didn't tell everyone I was married to her, I cut her off. "I'm tired of begging for your love." She wasn't in the mood to argue or was too drunk to care. She took a shower, put on one of her regular t-shirts, and got into bed. When I felt her reaching for me, I moved away. She didn't try again, and so our new life continued. Week by week, things went on like this. On Fridays, when Heather went out with friends, I was almost relieved to have the night to myself. But when she returned after midnight, her appearance made it clear we now had an even bigger problem. Although I didn't want to believe it, it seemed to me that Heather was taking things to a new level. She didn't speak to me on Saturday and avoided eye contact. An avalanche of emotions raged inside me, but I wasn't going to force her to speak. She came out twice more and returned with the same distant look. Finally, I decided to act. It was Friday again, and Heather was going out with her friends. Sue honked from the front door, and just as Heather was about to tell me not to wait for her, I tossed something to her. She caught it, and time seemed to stop. "I just want to make sure you don't bring anything contagious," I said, my tone sharp. "There's a lot of crap out there, and I don't want my kids getting anything from your lovers." She was stunned, but at this point, I didn't care what she thought. She started to say something, but I cut her off. "Your lover is probably waiting for you. You don't want to be late, do you?" I turned and went into the kitchen. As I heard the door close behind her, I knew I had my answer. She returned around 11 o'clock. I wasn't sure if she was drunk, but it didn't matter anymore. I pretended to be asleep, and it took forever for her to finally get into bed. I waited for something, anything, to see if there was even the slightest chance of salvaging what we had, but nothing happened. Saturday morning, I think Heather tried several times to say something, but she couldn't get the words out. She was shocked when I put on my best suit and started getting ready to go out while she was preparing dinner. I even sprayed a little of my favorite cologne, hoping she'd notice. Without a word, I left with a casual, "Don't wait for me," and walked out the door. I didn't have a date and didn't know exactly where I was going. I just wanted to show her that she wasn't the only one in demand. I had dinner at Dennis's and then went bowling, something I hadn't done in ages. As expected, I was terrible, barely scoring 100 points in the first game. By the fourth, my hand and thumb were sore from using muscles I hadn't used in the last 10 years, but I was having fun. I joked with the groups around me, even flirted with a few single ladies. Was this supposed to go further? No. None of them particularly interested me. I had enough problems to write a novel. I drove around the city for another half hour, stalling so I wouldn't return home before midnight. It didn't surprise me when I came back to find Heather waiting for me. I threw my jacket over my shoulder and walked past her, not paying attention to her presence. Two can play this game. The following Friday, Heather didn't go out, but on Saturday night, I was dressed and out the door by 7 o'clock. I went to see the first part of the new Harry Potter movie, had dinner at Boston Market, and attended a comedy show for adults at a local club. At 10:30, I stopped at a bar to finish the night. I didn't need to drive around the city aimlessly this time since it was already almost 1 a.m. when I headed home. It didn't surprise me that Heather was waiting for me again. I threw my jacket over my shoulder and walked past her, not acknowledging her. Two can play this game. "Are you having fun when I'm not here?" Heather asked at breakfast the next morning. "Yeah, fun. Thanks for asking," I replied with a smile. It wasn't exactly what she had in mind, but I wasn't going to play her game or get into an argument that morning. By then, the kids were in the kitchen, and we were getting ready for our usual Sunday breakfast. The kids didn't really notice the tension between us. As long as it wasn't loud or directly involving them, they saw no reason to worry. I wasn't worried either. I had already accepted that my marriage was over. I could mark time until the kids were older, but given everything that had happened, I was done with Heather. The only thing that changed was my attitude. People at work noticed it. "Steve, you've been in such a good mood lately." "I'm glad gloomy, downer Steve is gone," our office secretary Debbie said as I walked in and wished her good morning with a big smile on my face. I no longer looked at the clock to check when the day would end because I didn't have to rush home to anyone other than my two kids. When I took one of the single girls from the office to lunch one day, no one said anything, but when it became a regular thing over the next several months, people started to talk. Not to me, of course, but to everyone else. I was preparing for change in my life. There was no point in waiting for the other shoe to drop. When Heather returned home late Thursday, the kids were already fed and upstairs doing homework. She walked in and our eyes met. I released the tension I had been holding. "Damn, he must be good in bed," she muttered. "I haven't seen you look that satisfied in years. I hope it was worth it." "You have no idea what you're talking about," I replied with a smile. "You think you know everything, but you really don't know a damn thing." "Whatever you say, darling," I said casually. "By the way, are you coming with me to Ken and Pam's barbecue this Saturday?" "No way," she snapped. I'll probably have plans. You don't love our friends anymore? I asked a bit too casually. Now all the wives think I'm some kind of fool, and the guys probably think I'm weak for letting you cheat behind my back, she raged. So no, I'm not going. I'm not cheating on you, I said firmly. Well, if you don't get it from me, you'll get it from someone else. And frankly, I don't care anymore. Besides, soon they won't even be my neighbors, Heather added coldly. What do you mean? I asked, slightly confused. Our house is up for sale starting tomorrow, she said, almost smugly. You can't do this without my permission, I protested. It won't matter soon anyway, she shot back. After the divorce, you won't be able to afford the house payments. And I'm definitely not going to pay for the house, so you and your new lover can cohabitate at my expense. What scam are you talking about? I asked incredulously. Weren't you listening? Heather said, her voice rising. I think we can make enough from selling the house to pay off 2 cars and most of our credit cards. That way we can both start over somewhere else. I've already found a small apartment 3 blocks from work. I can save money on gas by walking to work. Heather just stood there, her mouth agape, unable to believe what she was hearing. You've completely lost your mind, you know that? I said, but at least I won't have to deal with a heartless person anymore. I took a deep breath and continued. Read my lips. I'm not cheating on you. Understand? I don't care anymore. What we had is long gone, and I don't think even divine intervention could bring it back. I'm tired of your mood swings, your idiotic games, and living without intimacy. I want a normal life with a loving, caring wife. And it could be anyone, just not you. So go ahead. Sleep with whoever you want, and don't worry about me. Honestly, you haven't been bothered by me for the last couple of years. I said what I was thinking and headed to my bedroom. It was still early, but I was completely exhausted. I read the kids a story, kissed them, and told them that their mother would come to put them to bed soon. After brushing my teeth, I undressed and climbed into bed at 9:30. To my surprise, I fell asleep quickly. The next day, a for sale sign appeared on our lawn. I figured it would be a long weekend, so Friday night, I picked up 2 movies the kids might like to watch. Heather would probably be out Friday night, giving me plenty of time to spend with the kids. When I arrived home, I saw that the for sale sign had been broken into pieces by the fence. It didn't matter. The house was already listed on the MLS, where everyone would look first. Dad, are we really selling the house? Both kids asked me. Yes, but don't worry. We can handle it, I replied. See? I told you we were moving, my son David said to his little sister Megan. They won't like the changes coming, but they've been resilient and will cope. Are you really selling the house? Ken, my neighbor, asked as I was taking the trash cans to the side of the road. Yeah, I replied. I caught Heather cheating, and we're getting divorced. I smiled as I said it, and Ken looked a bit taken aback by my frankness. He apologized and walked back to his house. I assumed that knowing his wife Pam, the whole neighborhood would know within an hour. We're not selling the house, Heather shouted as I walked into the kitchen. You can't sell it without my permission. Well, we won't get anything when the house goes to auction, I replied. But if we sell it, at least we'll get some money. The house is not for sale, she yelled. As you wish, I said, not willing to argue. I went upstairs to change clothes, hearing her make 2 phone calls. I knew it would be a loud evening. As I was putting on shorts and a t-shirt, I went downstairs to face her. Did you tell Ken and Pam that I was cheating on you and that we're getting a divorce? Have you gone completely crazy? She shouted. Probably for staying so long, I said, shrugging. But what's the problem? The problem is that now everyone in the neighborhood thinks I'm some kind of walking womanizer, she screamed. At least 2 wives already know you're cheating. What difference does it make if everyone knows now? I asked. Things aren't going as planned for you, Heather. We're not selling the house and we're not getting divorced. That's final. So I need to cancel the divorce filing for tomorrow? She asked sarcastically. One by one, the bricks of our marriage crumbled. Steve, what's wrong with you? Are you sick? She demanded. You didn't listen to a word I said, I replied calmly. I'm not cheating on you, Heather. That's not the case anymore. Even though I have proof you cheated, I haven't said a word about it. But maybe you don't understand. I don't care anymore. I don't want to be married to you. I'm not alleging infidelity, because it doesn't matter in this state. I'm just stating the reason, irreconcilable differences. Just sign the papers and we can both start new lives. I'll give you 50% of everything and pay alimony. What else do you need? I don't need a damn divorce, she snapped. Okay, let's try this, I said. I won't submit the paperwork for your job as planned. I'll just hand it to you so you can discuss it with your lawyer. How many times do I need to repeat that I don't need a divorce? We need to talk about what we will do with our children and where they will sleep, she said, trying to shift the conversation. I wanted to suggest she leave, but I knew neither of us would agree to that option. There's always the basement, I said with a half smile. I'll put a bed down there, and you'll be comfortable. I'm not leaving my bedroom, she said stubbornly. Well, neither am I replied. I guess that means we'll just have to tolerate each other and share the space. Shouldn't be a problem. I've been living with a roommate for a couple of years now. What's a few more months? We both knew it wouldn't be as smooth as we hoped. Words are cheap, after all. When I stopped wearing my wedding ring, she stopped wearing hers too. She didn't go out on Fridays anymore, complaining about it. Heather had always complained about how she couldn't drink, but now her friends were coming over to our house. I tried to be polite, not saying anything, but when they all started looking at me condescendingly, it made me want to puke. So what did I do? I started going on dates. Are you going on a damn date? Heather shouted as I got dressed. Not really a date, more like dinner, I replied. You forgot that you're still married to me, remember? How could I forget? She spat. You remind me of it every day with your constant presence. Well, how much time do we have left? I asked. 5 months until you give birth? Her eyes filled with tears, and she ran out of the bedroom. Did I feel bad? Yes and no. If this were my child, I'd feel a little bad about the way I treated her. But after the way she treated me all these months, a little retribution seemed necessary. I had lunch with Nancy for several months. I was open with her about my situation, telling her I was married, but only by name, and that I was probably getting a divorce once the baby was born. She asked how far I wanted to take things with us, and I told her I would leave it up to her. Dinner was good, but dessert was great. Did I feel bad? Maybe a little, but I was tired of living the life of a silent monk. I entered the house a little after 1 a.m., wanting Heather to know what I'd done. Her eyes said it all. The next morning, as I was preparing breakfast for everyone, she followed me around the kitchen. At least she waited until the kids left the room. How could you? She snapped. At least you could have washed yourself before you went to bed last night. Now I have to wash the bed linens and disinfect the sheets. Don't worry, I was careful, I said. If looks could kill, I'd be dead by now. Well, it looks like we have an open marriage now, so I guess you won't mind if I get some exercise too, she said, trying to meet my gaze. You started it and I guess you'll finish it, I replied coolly. I didn't start this, Heather shot back. You did. I may not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm not stupid, I said, standing my ground. I saw that look on your face that first night. Don't try to say it was just a bachelorette party. And let's not forget about that Thursday, when you came home with that big smile on your face. Like I said, you haven't looked that satisfied with me in ages. So don't act arrogant or like an innocent bride. You took your heart out of this marriage a long time ago, and your latest actions just drove the final nails into the coffin. So go ahead, sleep with whoever you want. I don't care. Just make sure you find someone who wants a pregnant woman. My words were full of anger and sarcasm. Heather started crying and ran into our bedroom, slamming the door behind her. It looked like the kids and I would be on our own for the rest of the day. We went grocery shopping and picked up a few things at Home Depot. I stayed out of the house as long as I could, but probably not long enough. When we got home, Sue was there. I put everything away, installed a new spark plug in the lawnmower, and was getting ready to mow the lawn when Sue came outside. You should be ashamed of yourself for the way you're treating Heather. Damn it, she's your wife and pregnant with your baby, she scolded me. Sue, that remains to be seen, I said, trying to stay calm. Besides, if you, Pam, and Carol hadn't put her under someone else, we wouldn't be in this mess. Steve, she didn't go and change as you so colorfully put it, Sue said, shaking her head. Then what do you want to call it? It had to be someone good, I replied. She kept coming back. I hope he likes doing it with a bump, because in a couple of months, Heather will look like she has a basketball down there. I had no sympathy for her or anyone else at that moment. Steve, you don't know anything, but you will ruin your marriage, Sue said, her voice stern. It's already destroyed. I'm just burying it underground, so to speak. She shook her head, gave me a nasty look, and walked off, leaving me alone on the lawn. Dinner was quiet, except for the kids talking about the movie we had watched. This was the third episode of Harry Potter, and although we had seen it in the cinema, they never got tired of it. Heather was nowhere to be seen, so after the movie ended, I got both kids ready for bed, read them each a short story, and turned out the lights with a kiss. Heather was lying in bed reading when I walked in. The kids are waiting for a goodnight kiss, I said, heading toward the bathroom. The long shower and other stuff only took me about 20 minutes, but when I returned to the bedroom, she had put down her book. She was waiting for me, dressed in nothing but a pair of night shorts. Can we talk? She asked. I looked at her, knowing exactly where this conversation was headed. It's just a matter of time before we find out whose baby you're really carrying, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. Heather didn't like where the conversation was heading. I know I haven't been the most loving and caring wife to you for a while, she admitted. But that wasn't on purpose. Things got so crazy, and I could never catch up, with everyone pulling me in a million different directions. For that, I'm sorry. Nonsense, I replied flatly. You closed yourself off from me a long time ago. I was there for you, but you had your own agenda, whatever it was. I tried. God knows how much I tried. But in the end, I gave up on you and what was left of our marriage. So now we're just waiting for this to end. Well, what are you going to do when you find out it's really your baby? She asked, trying to make me second-guess myself. I guess I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, I said, no longer in the mood to talk. Life, as they say, goes on. Bills still had to be paid, and the kids needed both of us to raise them. Heather tried her best to make our lives seem normal, but nothing was normal anymore. Then, I shocked her when I told her I'd go with her to the next party in the area. Aren't you going to make a scene and humiliate me and the kids? She asked, clearly worried. You don't trust me anymore? About the same way you trust me, darling, I said, my voice cold. Nothing's changed. The children were playing outside, and the women gathered in the kitchen, discussing Heather's pregnancy. The men were drinking in the backyard. I can't believe you had the courage to go on a date, Sue said. Carol would kill me if I even thought about it. I'm just tired of begging for it, I replied. Since I'm not getting it at home anymore, I've decided not to give it up anymore. She's going to divorce you, you know that? Her husband said with a condescending look. So what? I responded. How will this be worse? If you were told you could never have an intimate relationship with your wife again, would you stay or find someone else? I'm still searching and enjoying every moment. Heather can take half of everything I have, which is basically debt, and I'll probably pay child support, but I'm already doing that, so what's the difference? I just want a caring, non-controlling wife who still likes to have a night together a couple of times a week, not once or twice a month. I finished my beer and leaned back, feeling a little lighter. Okay, wise guy, Sue's husband said, stepping closer to me. What will you do if it turns out that she really is carrying your child? Well, my friend, I said calmly, I'll make a decision when I get the test results. But if your wife and her good friends hadn't taken her out and had a night with her on the side, I wouldn't have had to worry about it, would I? I walked closer to him. Since your wife was with Heather on all those nights, I guess I'm not the only cheater on the block. The argument didn't last long. God, I can't leave you alone for a minute without you making an idiot of yourself, Heather said, running out of the kitchen with the other wives trailing behind. I was simply defending your honor, Sue's husband said. If you think that, then your wife is too, because she was with you all those nights, I retorted. Let's go home, Heather said. I was looking forward to the taste of Ken's ribs, but apparently that won't happen. I shrugged. We ordered pizza for dinner, and the kids loved it. Although Heather was unhappy, the situation with her was becoming even more tense, if that was even possible. My dating every couple of weeks might have contributed to this, but I was finally starting to get some intimacy at home. I don't want you going on dates anymore, Heather said one night, while we were in bed. It's humiliating for me, especially when people we know see you, and that's happened before. I thought you said we have an open marriage now, and that's okay, I replied, my tone neutral. I never said that. You said it all. I just said that if you go out and cheat, I will too, but notice that I don't do that, Heather said defensively. I guess that's your problem, not mine, I replied. Steve, look, if you need some intimate release, I'm here for you. Besides, I need a little something myself sometimes. Stop it, I said. Are you really asking me to have a night with you? Maybe we should call the Pope and tell him I just witnessed a real miracle. You don't have to be so sarcastic, she shot back. I just said that since we're both here, I'm sure your boyfriend won't mind. I don't have a boyfriend and never have. I patted her stomach. You're exploitative, you know that? And you, she retorted. We found a compromise. It wasn't like a honeymoon, but there was more intimacy than there had been in the last 5 years. There was no need for me to go on dates anymore, and I thought we might even have a chance to try again. The last month had been difficult for all of us, but the kids were thrilled to have some stability back. A new sibling was on the way, and Heather was as big as a house. She was just 1 week away from going on maternity leave, and we both knew the rest of her pregnancy would be spent awaiting the birth of our baby. Our mothers were thrilled about the new grandson, and I think I was the only one who wasn't completely on board with the idea. Will you be present at the birth? Heather asked one night as we were cleaning up after dinner. I'm not sure that's a good idea, I replied. Well, you were there for the births of all our children, she said, almost pleading. I wish you were there when our baby was born. I wanted to say your child, but I think we were both tired of the snarky remarks, and she knew what I was thinking anyway. Sure, why not? What else should I do? If he's born black, we can save on the DNA test. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she stumbled into our bedroom. I followed her. Sorry for the snarky remark. It was inappropriate, I said as she cried face down on the bed. I know you're as worried as I am, I added. And if you want, I'll be there. She smiled through her tears and said she'd like that. The baby was due in mid-October, but as 3 weeks passed, Heather started to worry. The doctor wasn't concerned and reassured her that the expected birth date was only an approximation. The child decides when to be born, the doctor said. Why do babies insist on being born in the middle of the night? I wondered aloud. My parents got a call at 1:45 a.m. to come over and watch the kids while I bundled Heather into our minivan. Relax, breathe, I said to her all the way to the hospital. We couldn't say we were experienced, since many years had passed since our last birth, but there were no big surprises. Labor was still terrible, according to Heather. There's never enough medication, she groaned, and I was sure her fingerprints would be on my forearm for the next year. Our girl screamed as the end of the struggle approached. I was tired, but Heather was exhausted. When the baby was placed on her chest, we both took a moment to breathe. Well, she wasn't black, or at least that was obvious after a minute or so. The nurse took the baby away, and Heather was sent to the recovery room. I went into the corridor and started making phone calls. What did you call her? My mom asked. That's when I realized, for the first time in all these months, we hadn't discussed names. I always called her the child, and Heather referred to her as her child, but we never talked about names. Well, that's another question to solve, I said, looking at the baby. With dark hair, a small nose, and a plump face, she looked like almost every newborn in the maternity ward. How do mothers and grandmothers always know who a baby looks like at this stage? Can I tell if this is my child? No way. When the doctor came up and asked to take a smear, I already knew what it was for. Mixed emotions filled me as I waited for Heather to be transferred to the ward. The DNA test could take up to a week, so the baby would be at home until the test results came back. I had to push aside my doubts. The newborn wasn't at fault for being born into this chaos. And even if she wasn't mine, she didn't ask for any of this. Heather was tired, and the many visitors weren't helping. Around 7 p.m., I kicked everyone out. My parents would stay with the kids one more night, and for the first time, Heather and I would be alone with the baby. She's beautiful, isn't she? Heather said, beaming as she kissed the baby's forehead. I expected her to say something like, she looks like you. But I think she knew better than to push it. Your parents brought the new crib they bought and are going to assemble it with the changing table tomorrow, Heather said. I'll move the bed to the other wall so we have enough space for everything. We talked for another half hour but didn't discuss what was on both of our minds. We have to pick a name pretty soon, I said. They're asking me what to write on the birth certificate. We have plenty of time, Heather replied, smiling. I'm just glad she's healthy. I haven't seen you this happy in a long time, Heather said, placing a little kiss on my lips before I left. I had a lot to do, no matter what might happen in the future. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't take my eyes off the children's furniture. I don't know if I was exhausted or just tired, but I was really looking forward to having our girl home with us. The next day, I brought the kids to meet their little sister and told them they had to be extra nice when we brought her home. When they asked what we named her, I said we were still thinking about a name and asked for their suggestions. Most of the names didn't work, but they suggested one that I liked, Brittany. On the 4th day, everyone was home. Our bedroom was rearranged, the crib and changing table were set up, and the supply of baby food and diapers was ready. Everything was in complete disarray, but I said everything was fine. We had a good weekend with Brittany. On Monday, I didn't say a word to anyone about the baby. It was a little hectic at home, but somehow we managed. Work in the morning was standard, but by midday, everything had settled down. On the way home, I stopped at Subway to pick up dinner for everyone, looking forward to a quiet evening. As I approached the house, I noticed Heather's parents were just about to leave. I unloaded the bag of food onto the kitchen table and went to find my family. I found everyone in our bedroom, playing with the baby. I stopped at the door and just watched, listening to the kids laugh and seeing my wife play with Brittany's tiny feet. "They're so tiny," David said, touching them with his finger. "You two were so small once, and look how big you are now." My heart melted as I looked at the four of them. I quietly returned downstairs and made a louder entrance. "Who's ready for dinner?" I shouted as I peeked around the corner. The children shouted and ran downstairs. "Give me a minute. I'll put Brittany down and join you," my wife said, smiling at me. Life felt pretty good at that moment. Everyone talked at once, discussing everything from the baby to the weather. After dinner, Heather went upstairs to take care of the baby, and the kids and I cleared the table. Since we used paper plates, it was easy. Everything went straight into the trash. Couple of games, and it was time to turn out the lights. A bedtime story, a little prank, a kiss and a tight hug, and they were already asleep. "I didn't think they'd ever calm down," I said, getting ready for bed as I watched my wife breastfeed the baby. I brushed my teeth, rinsed my mouth, and returned to the bedroom just as she was putting the baby in her crib. "I'm going to miss what we've had these last couple of months," she said, her voice soft. "We're almost back to where we were at the beginning of our marriage." Her face was indifferent. "I would have sworn you were the father, but I guess I was drunker than I thought that night because I really don't remember it happening." She handed me the official envelope. I started reading it, but it was filled with legal jargon until I got to the last paragraph, which read, "There is no chance that you are Brittany's father." "Heather," I started, but she raised her hand to stop me. "I already know what you're going to say, so you don't have to say it," she replied. "I signed the divorce papers. They're on your desk in your office. If you find the right buyer for the house, go ahead. I won't stand in your way. Brittany and I are moving in with my parents tomorrow, so you won't have to look at us anymore. My mother will send the kids to school in the morning, and you can pick them up after work. I'm so sorry, but I'm glad it's finally over, so at least one of us can move on." With those words, she left the bedroom and went downstairs, probably to the office. I sat there, stunned and in shock. In the back of my mind, I had thought this could happen, but actually seeing it unfold was another thing. We had been happy again. Damn it, why was this happening to me? I sat on the bed and cried like a baby for the next half hour, covering my mouth so as not to wake Brittany. The rest of the night, I lay on my back in bed, feeling sorry for myself and trying to figure out what to do next. By 5:30, I had no answers except that I couldn't stay here and face Heather. That morning, I felt like a rag that had been wrung out too many times. I took a shower but forgot to shave and brush my teeth. I didn't make coffee or breakfast for the kids, and I didn't even pick up the newspaper from the porch. I just left. I needed to get away from here as quickly as possible. On autopilot, I drove to work and grabbed myself a cup of coffee. By 9 o'clock, it had already cooled down, and I was still sitting in my chair in my jacket. There were 3 messages on the phone, but I didn't even hear them. At 10 o'clock, my secretary replaced my iced coffee with fresh coffee and asked if there was anything she could do. "No, I don't think anyone can fix this," I said quietly. I woke up and got to work, but when I returned home, Heather and the baby were gone. There was a note on the door saying she wanted to keep the kids overnight to talk to them, but I could pick them up tomorrow. The note wasn't even signed. When I went up to our bedroom, I saw that everything was gone. The baby's new furniture, her clothes, all of Heather's personal belongings from the bathroom. I walked into our children's rooms, and they were just as they had left them in the morning. unmade beds and scattered pajamas. I didn't eat on Monday night, and surprisingly, I didn't get drunk, though I probably should have. My brain was overloaded, and it just hurt. I wanted to feel nothing. I wanted to sleep. I wanted this nightmare to end, but it didn't. The rest of the week passed in a blur, and the weekend gave me too much time to think, which was the last thing I wanted to do. 3 weeks later, I was tired, exhausted, but still alive. I was right. My children turned out to be resilient. We got into a routine and stuck to it, no matter the cost. As long as I knew what I needed to do, I could function without too much trouble. During the first month, I found a letter with my name on it sitting on the kitchen counter. I knew who it was from, and that's where it stayed, unopened. My mother and my mother-in-law became real saviors. They did what I couldn't. I was gradually returning to reality, piece by piece, but I was still far from the person I had been a couple of months ago. Back then, I had all the answers. The simple until the what if becomes reality. I had a lot of anger, but when I let it out, it scared the kids, so I kept it under control. When they weren't looking, I would hit the wall. My neighbors, with the exception of Ken and Pam next door, stayed away. I was invited to their gatherings, but I never went. One day, I saw Sue and her husband at the mall, and my anger flared as I thought about punching him in the face again. They crossed to the other side of the passage and kept their distance. When everything was settled and agreed upon 90 days later, I became a bachelor again. Everything was divided equally, including joint custody of the children. I hadn't spoken to Heather since that night, and since our parents were busy with the kids, there hadn't been a need to. Our only big problem was that the house wasn't selling. I lowered the price twice, but there were still no buyers. It was probably still overpriced, but I wasn't going to give it away. We really needed the money to pay off our debts. David and Megan were coping. They finally accepted that we were no longer a family, but since they saw their mother and little sister almost every day, this became the norm for them. I was handling school activities and most other things, and sometimes I thought I saw Heather. Things were going well at work, or as well as could be expected in an economic downturn. I became the person in the office who got noticed because I was the only bachelor there. I went on dates with a few women and got into bed more than once, but the single life wasn't as appealing as I thought it would be, especially with 2 kids at home. Men from the area matched me with friends, and God forbid, even with relatives, but nothing came of it. It was too early and too painful, so I usually told them to get lost. The only thing that hadn't changed was the position of that envelope on the counter. A year had passed, and although Heather hadn't said anything about herself or the baby, it felt like she was dying to say something. I knew my mother was also dying to say something, but we had a formal agreement that mentioning Heather and Brittany in my presence would result in death, and they kept their word. I heard everything I needed to know from my 2 children, more than I wanted to know. Since they saw their mother and half-sister almost every day at their grandparents' after school, I learned more than I could ever have asked for. 14 months and 6 days later, Heather's mother suffered a stroke. She almost died, and her days of babysitting were over. I often visited her in the hospital and somehow did not run into Heather there. My mother took on childcare responsibilities, but it was too much for her. We needed to come up with something else. Heather, this is Steve. Do you have a minute to talk? That's how our conversation began. I expressed my condolences for her mother and said that if there was anything I could do to help, just let me know. As you know, Mom has been looking after the kids, but it's not working, and we need to figure something out, Heather said. Can we meet and talk about this? I didn't know what she was thinking, but I had to literally drag the answer out of her. I think I can come by on Saturday afternoon. How about 2 p.m.? That's fine. I'll even grill something, and we can have dinner here. Steve, not necessarily. It's okay. See you on Saturday. It wasn't as bad as I thought. We had been sharing all expenses since day one, but this was the first real conversation we'd had since that night. I was very pleased with myself. David and Megan didn't see anything special about it. They saw their mother all the time, so what was the point of her coming to dinner? I, on the other hand, was a bundle of nerves. I dressed casually and made sure the house was clean. I hadn't changed the locks and wasn't sure what the reception would be like. She rang the doorbell and then called from the back patio that the door was open. She had lost weight, her hair had grown longer, and she didn't wear much makeup, not like she used to when she was trying to impress me. Apparently, she brought a pie and set it on the kitchen table before asking if I had any diet soda. "Everything you want is in the fridge," I replied, unsure how to act. I pulled out the umbrella for the picnic table in the backyard. "I think we'll have dinner here if that's okay." "That sounds good," she replied, her voice devoid of emotion. While the kids were in the living room playing video games, I asked her if she had any ideas on what to do. "I thought of a few," she said. "Do you have any?" "Well, I was thinking about babysitting first," she said, walking over to the refrigerator and grabbing a bottle of beer. "But since it's only an hour or so in the morning and a couple of hours in the evening, no one would want to work such short hours. And even if they did, we wouldn't be able to afford it." I asked around in the area if anyone knew someone who would like to work as a nanny for a few hours. But again, nothing worked out. I took a long sip from the bottle. If I could change my work hours, it would solve the morning problem, but we still have the after-school issue. I could probably trust the kids to stay home for half an hour, but a few hours is too much. I'm stumped. "I have an idea, but you probably won't like it," Heather said, looking me straight in the eyes. "Well, it must be better than what I came up with," I replied, half joking. "Don't be so sure until you hear it." She paused. "You know that Mom needs long-term rehabilitation, and Dad will be busy caring for her. I'm thinking about finding my own place so I don't disturb them. You have an empty basement, and if we fix it up a little, Brittany and I could move in there. It would solve all our problems." My brain was still stuck on the "you have an empty basement" part. "You don't want to be alone with yourself, Heather?" I said, trying to process her suggestion. "We're still paying off the house, and even though we've cut back on all the frills, we're still tight on money. I could find a place, but with this and childcare, we'd be back to where we were a year and a half ago." My mouth didn't function properly as I struggled to think of a response. She stood up, grabbed another can of soda, and then noticed the envelope on the counter. I hadn't tried to hide it. I had almost forgotten it existed. It had become such a familiar fixture on my counter. She picked it up, glanced to see if it was open, then placed it back where it was. "Well, think about what I said. And if you have a better idea, let me know." "Heather, I'm not sure this will work." "I told you you wouldn't like it," she said, sitting back down. "But until we sell this house, we're both stuck. It's not like we've ever lived together." She was right about that, but I didn't like the memories of her last day here. "Let's have dinner, and we'll talk after," I suggested. I put 2 racks of ribs on the grill, and they cooked well. I boiled some corn on the stove. She helped prepare the salad, and 30 minutes later, we were all sitting at the table. "How are things going at work?" I asked, taking a bite of the butter-coated corn. "Okay," she replied, "but I've reduced my hours because my mom is sick. I just want to make sure I don't irritate them and get fired, which is something I can't afford right now." "They won't do that. You've been working with them for years," I reassured her. "No job is safe in this economy," she countered. "We fired 3 people right after the new year. Thank God I can do everything in the office. Otherwise, I could have been one of them." "Well, what about you?" she asked, turning the conversation to me. "Surprisingly, we're doing well," I said. "Business is down a bit, but better than last year." I think if we get through this year, we'll be fine. You have no idea how lucky you are, she said, her voice a bit incredulous. Lucky? Yeah, of course. I thought to myself, though it didn't feel like luck. I put the food away while Heather loaded the dishes into the dishwasher. David and Megan put everything else in the refrigerator. I cleaned the grill of any residue and seared it with a wire brush. I lowered the umbrella, and that was the end of it. The kids were in the living room watching TV or playing a game, but Heather was nowhere to be seen. She didn't leave, did she? I thought, looking around the first floor. I found her in the basement, walking around. I can arrange this, she said as I approached her from behind. I think this is a bad idea, I said, hesitating. Why? She asked, turning and looking me straight in the eye. You know, with your meetings and everything, I began trying to explain. I think we've done enough for the kids. Don't you think? So, what you're trying to say is you don't want the children to see their mother walking around. Is that what you mean? She asked sharply. No, I don't mean that. It's just, Steve, are you dating and bringing someone home? She asked, her voice softer. No, I'm not, I said, frustrated. Let's get up and talk. The first beer went quickly, and I grabbed the second one. She laid out her plan. Since the basement had separate access to the garage, it could actually work as a mother-in-law apartment. I start work at 9 o'clock so I can send David and Megan to school. Since I finish at 3:30, they'd only have to be home alone for about 25 minutes. Heather, this looks good on paper, but there are a lot of other issues. Not to mention some emotional issues that I might be dealing with, I said, feeling overwhelmed. She walked over to the table. Have you never read it? At first, I wanted to tear her into a million pieces and burn every scrap in the fireplace. Then, as my anger cooled, I didn't want to read how she'd portrayed me as some kind of demon, or hear about how long it had lasted. In the end, I think I was afraid it would make me miserable again, and I couldn't go through that again. Believe it or not, I thought that before that night we had a great chance to start over. After we reconnected, within 3 months we were a family again. If it weren't for that stupid test, we'd still be one. So, to answer your question, no, I haven't read it. We both fell silent. Well, if you ever decide to read it, you'll find it an interesting read, she said. You may not like everything, but I think you owe me that, after 10 years of marriage. I didn't owe her anything. Well, I have to go, she continued. Think about what I said. I think it will be beneficial for both of us, and if we make some rules about other things, I think it could work. I told her I'd think about it. She hugged and kissed the kids and kissed me on the cheek before heading back to her parents. I sat in the kitchen, drank 3 more beers, and stared at that stupid envelope. After my 4th beer, around 2:15 in the morning, I finally tore it open and started reading. She was right about one thing. It was an educational read. I read the 4 pages once, then read them again, not fully believing what she had written. A lot of it was the same sorry crap I'd already heard, but a few points made me both angry and sad. Why she thought I didn't respect her was incomprehensible to me. She said she felt like a piece of meat, like some kind of toy that could be used whenever I wanted. She said it got to the point where she thought it was her marital responsibility, something she had to do from time to time. She knew we had a problem, sure. I wanted intimacy a lot more than she did, and sometimes I got hurt when I didn't get it. But she was damn wrong on this point. I loved her, and intimacy brought me closer to her. True, we argued about it, but going from 3 times a week to twice a month, and only when she was drunk, made me angry. My only thought was that she was tired of intimacy with me and didn't give me a chance to fix the situation before abandoning us and starting to hook up with other men. I knew she would bring up our financial problems and how I criticized her spending on clothes, but I thought she was spending too much. I only bought what I really needed, leaving the rest for the children or her. I felt pretty good about this. Then the real content of the letter began. You have to believe me when I say that I really thought the baby was yours. I never even knew who that man was. I was so mad at you that night when Sue and Pam left me at the table that I just had one drink after another. I remember Sue pouring coffee on me and yelling at me for something I apparently did. I stopped for a minute, trying to remember how she got home that night. I knew she had been drinking, but she didn't seem that drunk when I saw her. But that could have happened hours before. I wasn't sure what really happened, but I definitely crossed the line, so to speak. When Sue brought me home, she told me not to say anything and to go to bed. The next morning, you looked at me like I was the last piece of trash. You couldn't have known what happened, but from the look in your eyes, it seemed like you did. After that night, we kept going out. I wanted to show that I was independent, that I didn't need your approval. I wanted to prove to myself that other men found me attractive. Who was I kidding? The only thing men wanted was a night with me. They didn't care about my thoughts or my appearance. They were only interested in what they could get. We just went to dinner and talked about our husbands. What we said wasn't very flattering. You noticed that I didn't go out anymore after that night, but I was shocked when you started going out. First, I thought you were bluffing, but when you left, I got worried. If you thought I was cheating on you, I wasn't sure what you were going to do when you returned home. I was relieved when I saw that you had done nothing. I was planning some fun for the next week, but when you walked out again without saying a word, I knew I was in trouble. Everything went wrong between us after that. That Thursday night, when I came home in such a good mood, it wasn't because of what you thought. I had found a huge mistake that one of the lawyers made in an important case, and I was praised for my excellent work. The owner of the company gave me a bonus of $500 on the spot. I was over the moon. I walked through the door, and before I could say anything, you called me a cheater. I was broken to the core. I hated you for what you said, but I didn't have the strength to stand up to you that night. I remember that evening, and she was right. I really did attack her with all the accusations before she could even open her mouth. I was angry, but it was also her fault for not saying anything. Would I have listened and believed her? I guess we'll never know now. The last page of the letter was about when she found out she was pregnant. Over and over again, she wrote that she thought it was my child. It had to be, as I never slept with anyone else. I destroyed her spirit when I slept with Nancy the first time. She didn't have to ask if I did it. She could feel it on me. She wrote that she almost left me the next morning. Steve, when the first test came back positive, I immediately went to the store and bought 2 more. I couldn't be pregnant, she had written. She described the horror of realizing she was indeed pregnant. Steve is going to kill me, she kept repeating to herself. We were at the lowest point in our marriage, and I had to somehow bring everything back to when we were happy. You had completely given up on me and our marriage. We had terrible fights, but I wasn't going to give up. You should have divorced me, but I wasn't going to give up without a fight. I've been in heaven for the last 3 months. We were experiencing our 2nd and 3rd honeymoons rolled into one. I knew you still had doubts, but every night I did everything I could to make those doubts disappear. You were mine again, or so I thought stupidly. When our girl was born, I was the happiest woman on earth. You were with me. We were together again. Brittany looked exactly like you, or at least I thought so. Maybe I just wanted to see it. When I opened that envelope, I knew what it contained. You were the father of our beautiful girl. I cried from 11 a.m. until 2 p.m., she had written. When my parents finally arrived, they asked me questions I didn't have answers to. They told me I could come back to them, not that they wanted me to, but what choice did they have? You looked so happy that evening. I was going to enjoy my family until the last moment. I loved you so much, and now I have to hurt you. I wanted God to take my life before this happened. But he didn't. There was no need to wait this time. The words on the sheet will not magically change. I didn't care about myself. I only thought about my child, my two wonderful children, and the husband I would have to destroy. You didn't scream. I would scream if we switched places. You still loved me. I saw it in your eyes, but I failed you. I left. I couldn't look into those eyes anymore. I died in the office that night. My marriage, my life is over. David and Megan didn't understand why I couldn't be with them anymore, but I figured you'd explain to them someday. Sue became my only friend, and we both realized it was too late to get to me that night, as it was the only time I would kill that man and gladly go to the gallows if I could find that man again. Unfortunately, I don't even remember what he looked like. I'm not going to beg for forgiveness or ask you for anything. I lost that right the night I came out angry with you. You said you wanted a loving and caring wife, and I hope you find what you were looking for because you deserve more than what I gave you. I don't want to say goodbye, but I have no other choice. I love you, always will, and wish you all the best. The only thing I ask of you is not to hate me forever. I'm not worthy of your effort. Signed, your loving wife, Heather. I read it a third time the next morning, this time sober. I woke up the kids and sent them to school, then called in to work and took the day off. With a few cups of coffee, I sat down at the computer and wrote a response to Heather point by point. I didn't do this out of spite, but it was time to set the record straight, at least as I saw it. I didn't put all the blame on her for the destruction of our marriage, but she was the one who finally ended it when our marriage was already on life support. I only gave up after I realized that we would never be happy again, and that I deserved to be happy. A little under 4 hours and a whole pot of coffee later, I was done. I hit the send button and sat back, feeling pretty good. She probably wouldn't like a lot of what I wrote, but she would know it was true. My kids and I went to a Chinese buffet and I ate too much. I should have gotten my money's worth. We had a nice evening, and before going to bed, I checked my email. There was no reply. I slept well and woke up refreshed, ready to take on the world. 2 days later, I found Heather at home after getting back from work. The children were already playing outside, and she was waiting for me in the kitchen. I was a little on edge, but when she asked if we could talk, I thought, why not? The voices rose, followed by tears, hugs, and a few kisses. There was some laughter, but none of us thought it was funny. We dined together, and by 11 o'clock, plans were made, agreements reached, and a new chapter of my life began. Heather and Brittany moved into the basement the following week. I prepared 2 rooms so she could have a bedroom and a small living area. It was a risk, but financially it was the best move, and we both knew it. The first week, I felt like I was on caffeine. I was so nervous and irritable. Then it got easier, but it was never the same. When she came one night and lay in my bed, it was wonderful. As it became more common, I thought I was in heaven, but we were just fooling ourselves. It was nothing more than 2 people reaching out to each other for something that was now unattainable. When the intimacy stopped, we became the same as we were when this nightmare began. The first time Heather went out on a date, it felt strange. I watched her leave, and I heard the last brick hit the ground. The second and third times I was angry. She was no longer my wife, but it felt just like those nights long ago when she would go out with her friends and leave me behind. I no longer had the right to feel that way, but I was still damn angry. Maybe it would have worked if it weren't for Brittany. She was a wonderful child, but a constant reminder that only brought me pain. When I told Heather she had to leave because it wasn't working, she cried. But at least she didn't beg me to let her stay. I loved her, probably always would, but I wasn't in love with her anymore. It just wasn't in my power anymore. The kids were angry. I expected that. I thought about leaving on my own and renting an apartment, but I abandoned the idea. This was my house, at least until it was sold. I was no longer the victim. I was now the one making decisions and needed to move on. Nancy abandoned me, saying I was stuck in place and not moving anywhere. My baggage was holding me back from getting what I really wanted in life, and she wasn't going to wait for me to finally figure it out. Heather and I weren't friends. We couldn't be. A friend is someone you trust, who doesn't lie to you and cares about your interests. Heather didn't fit that description. In retrospect, the house didn't sell and I took it off the market, at least for a while. I had my 2 children, and they still had a great relationship with their mother. Shortly after this, Heather's mother died, and her father actually gave her the house. He retired and now travels the country, or runs from the memories he sees every time he closes his eyes. Heather and I talk, but only sometimes and only about our children. I try never to ask about our love life or Brittany. I'm not doing this out of rudeness, but as they say, it's better not to touch dead dogs. Heather still visits my mom, and my mom always tells her to give me some time. Maybe I'll come to my senses. But that will never happen, at least not in my lifetime. But she still hopes. I occasionally date Nancy, but like Heather, it's more about physical satisfaction. She says I'm great in bed, but sometimes I try too hard, whatever that means. I was angry, then sad, then numb, before I realized that I still had the great American dream deep inside. Victoria was so different from me that it was frightening. She was hot oil and I was warm water, but somehow we mingled when we were together. She was a single mother with a little girl who didn't trust anyone, especially men. She was a friend of my neighbor Ken's cousin, whom I met at his party a couple of months ago. Our kids played together and David played a little too rough for my comfort. "Careful, boy, before someone gets hurt," I shouted, reprimanding him after he pushed his sister. "Your son?" she asked. "Yes, but only when he leads," I quickly replied. "Then he's your wife's son," she remarked. "No, still mine. And without a wife," I added almost to myself. She was quite tall, slender, with long black hair and dark eyes that asked questions and warned you to keep your distance. She only drank tea that evening and peppered me with questions before leaving with the group she came with. The next week, Pam asked what I thought of her. "She's beautiful but a little aloof," I answered, not giving it much importance. A week later, she and her daughter Karen came again. Since our girls were playing together, we were pushed into each other's company again. After the 4th time, I asked her out, and I wasn't too surprised when she said yes. It wasn't love at first sight, and it certainly wasn't just attraction, not for that night, at least. Not long after, she held all the cards. I didn't know where I stood with her, and since she didn't open up to me, I went on a casual date with another woman. Guess who found out about this? She had a temper. When she burst into my house the following Saturday, demanding to know why I cheated on her, I said, "I didn't cheat on you. I just went on a date. You're just like my ex-husband and all the other men. You can't be trusted," she shouted. That's when all the suppressed anger I'd been holding back for months came rushing out. I blew up and told her she didn't know anything about me, that I wasn't going to stand there and be accused of something I didn't do. I was furious, about to turn and walk back into the house, when I noticed Ken, Pam, and several neighbors standing outside, listening to our argument. I decided to take a different approach. "Well, now that we've settled that, do you want to have dinner with me tonight or not?" This caught her off guard, and I wasn't sure if I would get a slap or a kiss. I didn't get either, but we did have dinner that night and every week after that for months. After 2 bottles of wine, yes, she drank it. I told her what I was looking for and what I didn't want. With a little liquid courage, I didn't beat around the bush, and for the first time, she finally opened up. Did we make love? Maybe. This would have happened if, when I stood up, I hadn't fallen back onto the sun. I think I drank too much. We lay in bed together, talking fully dressed before we fell asleep, or more likely I just passed out. When I woke up, Victoria wasn't there, and I thought I had ruined everything. But then I heard a noise in the kitchen. I found everyone, including her and Karen, at breakfast. Finally, someone got their lazy fifth place out of bed. "Doesn't your head hurt?" She smiled, trying not to laugh. I needed coffee. I was grateful. I brushed my teeth before going downstairs because she kissed me. "This is for last night," she said. "But we didn't do anything, did we?" I whispered back. "No," she said. "And that's the point. If I had pushed you or done something stupid, you probably would have already left this morning." For me, it was a matter of respect, trust, and readiness for a long-term relationship. After 7 months, I begged her to move in with me, but she refused. Something about the time not being right. On Friday evening, when she came into my house with bags full of groceries, I was waiting for her. I was on one knee holding the ring box. Tired from waiting, she walked past me, put the bags on the counter, came back, pulled me to my feet, kissed me, and whispered, "Yes," in my ear. She put the ring on my finger. Now she lives with me, as her strict mother reminds me at every opportunity, but we both enjoy every moment. The mothers are planning a small, intimate wedding for us as soon as possible. As a family, we all go to church, which is new for my group, but we are a family, and that's what matters. Victoria had only 2 conditions before moving in. 1, a new mattress for our bed, and 2, when we got married, I should adopt Karen. If we're going to be a family, we need to be a real family with no exceptions. There will be no "your children, my children," or, God forbid, stepchildren. There will be our children. I completely agreed with her. Our kids told Heather, and she said she was happy for us, but I could still see the pain in her eyes. Against my wishes, Victoria invited her to the wedding, but Heather said she wouldn't come. Victoria said she didn't want ghosts in her new life. As I said, she is the hot oil and I am the water she warms. From the very first day we met, I love her madly, and I sincerely believe she is the one I've been waiting for. Without telling her, I took out a loan against my 401k and bought out Heather's share of the house. I wanted this to be our home, only our home. That was important to me. She wasn't happy about what I did, but she understood and loved me more for it. Our life is not ideal. With her hot temperament, we have more than enough reasons for reconciliation. For a while, I thought my fingers would never straighten out, but we both understand that we're in this for the long haul. Problems are just issues that need to be resolved, not nails in the coffin like they were before. I'm incredibly happy, although at some point, I thought this would never happen to me again. I think what they say is true. Good things come to those who wait. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.